Do you love using lots of card making products and techniques, but also love the clean look of lots of white space? Today, Therese and I are sharing ideas for elevating your clean and simple cards. Since it's July, I made Christmas cards, but these ideas will work all year long. My first idea for elevating a clean and simple card is to change it from a regular card to a fun fold. I'm doing a Z fold, but a gatefold is also easy to do quickly, so that's another good option. I started by stamping my Mama Elephant sentiment in the center of the inside back panel with black ink. The next idea is to add some partial stenciling to the card. This is the Scandinavian Quilt stencil from A Colorful Life Designs, and I'm just going to use this one line of Nordic snowflakes with the borders. I noticed that my card front fits perfectly between two of the lines in the stencil design, and that's going to help me with placement. I want the stencil in the corner of my sticky mat to make it easy to reposition if I need to, so I adjusted the card so that it fit perfectly between those two lines. Then I masked off the left edge and also above and below the part of the design that I wanted blended onto the card. Initially, I thought I would just blend up to the sentiment kind of free-handed, but then I figured it would look neater if I masked it off. It's pretty much exactly the same width as my mint tape, but later you'll see that I kind of wish I had left a little space on either side of it because the design crowds it a bit. Next, I lined up the stencil to finish the line across this side of the card. Another way to keep a design clean looking is to limit your color palette. Today I'm using only red and white, but I am using 2 or 3 shades of red on each card to add some interest. You can see variation in the color all along that row of snowflakes. Then I flipped the card over and I did the exact same thing to get that row of snowflakes along this side of the card. You'll see when I fold it all up, the row is continuous on both front and back of the card. That's another fun way to elevate a clean design. There's loads of white space, but that pattern is also in unexpected places. For the front of the card, I blended 2 colors of red ink onto a large circle die cut. One of the best tips ever for smooth ink blending is to use lots of ink and work while it's wet. I coated the die cut with the lighter red ink directly from the ink pad, and then I used a blender brush to blend the darker shade just on one side. When this is dry, you'll see that the blending is seamless. I folded the card in half, and then to make my Z fold, I scored another line at 2 1/8 inches, and I folded that portion back. If you don't want to measure, you don't have to. Just fold the front of the card back in half, and then burnish it really well with your bone folder. I added a snowflake from a Jillian Vance design and a larger white circle to my focal point. And if you wanted to make a regular card, this is how it would look and open. But with just one easy extra fold, you've added interest and given the recipient a little surprise. I added glue to just half of my snowflake circle panel, and now the card's done. That continuous front and back row of snowflakes makes this card look good from every angle. For a little festive shine, I added some iridescent dewdrops from Crafty Meraki between the snowflake arms on the front of the card. Now I've got another variation on partial stenciling, and that is to mask off a big border around the center portion of the card front. I'm using a rectangle mask design for this, but you could easily create your own with a rectangle die or use tape around the edges. I've got my 3 red inks ready, and I blended the middle shade at the bottom of the rectangle and the lightest one at the top, letting it fade out into the center to create kind of a glow. At this point, you don't even have to worry about smooth blending, because for the next step, I layered over a stencil that has quite a busy pattern of Christmas flowers. I positioned it so that one of the larger flowers was centered, and then I blended another layer of the middle red through, and then I finished by adding the darker red just to the flower centers. We don't often think of stenciling, and especially layered stenciling, as a clean design, but preserving that big white border around the intense design really helps. This design was inspired by my friend Amy, and she took it another level with an embossing folder, so I did too. This is the Playful Circles embossing folder from Altenew. I wanted a small, regular pattern all over the design to not distract from the flowers and the stenciling, and I got that. In the video, it actually looks okay here, but to me in real life, it was a little too much. I debated about what to do, and in the end, I took a chance and I ran the panel through again, just between the plates to try and flatten it a bit. And I was actually really happy with that. I ended up with more of a 2D embossed look, which was a little more subtle. So there's something you can try for getting a different look from your 3D embossing folders. You're welcome. Die-cut sentiments are another thing that aren't always considered clean and simple, but I love them, and I think by keeping them white, they can still have a very clean look. I've got this Hero Arts Merry Christmas die that I think is retired, but I love the mid-century feel of this bouncy script. To add some dimension and make it more legible, I wanted to stack 3 of them together, which can be tricky, so here's some tips for how I do it. First, I choose the top layer die cut. If they're all perfect, that's great, but if any are damaged or have a mark on them, I make sure to use them underneath that perfect top layer. Next, I use liquid glue. I know there's lots of other ways to do it, but I find that the liquid glue really is the most forgiving as far as being able to move the little fiddly bits around. This is especially true with script dies like this, with thin lines that can stretch and move around. I don't put glue all along the die cut, but I do make sure that I have a little dot on any of the ends that could become visibly separated. Once I have dots of glue along the bottom layer die cut, I lay the next layer on top. Then working from one end, I push the 2 layers in line. This is so much easier with a big chunky text die, but I do really love the stacked look. When I've worked my way to the other end, I take a look and I make any last-minute adjustments before the glue dries. Then I look at the back. Especially if you have a different color on top, you may see problems from the back that you didn't see from the front. As for the dot on the eye, well, I filmed my cards out of order, so I already have a pile of small off-cut circles up here from the next card, which include the perfect size for the dots that I of course lost. To position the sentiment on the card, I put it on an angle for a couple of reasons. One, I want it to fit on the red area for maximum legibility, but I also think it's consistent with that mid-century feeling of the font. I positioned them both without any glue to make sure they're exactly where I want them, and I made note of where the top of the Christmas T fits into the bottom of the Merry word. Then I removed the Christmas, put glue on the back, and then I put that back in place. For the dot, it's easier to put the glue on the card and then use a jewel picker to position it. Then I add glue to the Merry and I position it back so that the T and the R meet up exactly where I wanted them. So there's some quick tips for stacking up and positioning intricate die-cut sentiments. I hope they're helpful. I added some of the iridescent dewdrops, but they're pretty subtle in that busy pattern. Next up is a pretty messy technique. I'm using all 3 of my red inks to create stripes on a piece of white cardstock. You could use pattern paper or colored cardstock instead of making your own if you prefer. Then I splattered some water to create some lighter spots, and finally I splattered some gold watercolor over top. So far it's not very clean and simple, is it? But I've got 2 4¼ inch square card bases here, and a dotty wreath die from Gina K Designs, and I cut that from the front of both cards to create lots of little circle windows. This is what created all those little leftover dots I used in the previous card. I love to hang on to these to use as little embellishments or to replace lost letter dots. So now I've got 2 ways to use a messy panel to finish these identical cards. The first is to use the bold die cut on the white card. There's still loads of white space and tons of interest from those little circle windows. The second is to use the white die cut on the front and then put the messy panel on the inside to show through the windows. Again, there's tons of white space, but it's a great opportunity for using a panel created with a messy technique. Next, I wanted to do something that I couldn't decide whether to call faux embossing or faux cover plate. It's kind of both. Anyway, I started by putting some double-sided adhesive on the back of a big panel of white cardstock. I think it was about 4 by 8 inches. Then I took a group of Catherine Pooler snowflakes and I cut them from the panel 3 times. I cut the panel apart each time I ran it through, thinking that I didn't want the pressure back on those snowflakes that had already been cut. So now great, these pretty snowflakes with lots of fiddly bits are now stickers that I just need to peel off and stick to a card panel. Right? Right? Well, I'm not sure where I went wrong, and please tell me if you know, but I had no luck at all separating the snowflakes from the double-sided adhesive. Maybe it was the humidity here, I don't know, but it became clear pretty quickly that it would be both easier and faster to recut the snowflakes and use my trusty liquid glue. And in all my frustration, I forgot to turn on my camera as I was gluing them down, but I do want to say that to get a nice looking panel, I would start from the center or one corner and then work my way out to try and avoid any awkward empty spaces that a snowflake can't fit into. Also, make sure that some of them go over the edges so that it looks organic. Then just clean up the edges by trimming it down to a panel size, and it looks like you've used an embossing folder or cut a cover plate die and layered it over top. But since it's white on white, it still looks clean. Well, except for that literal dirty area in the bottom corner, which I tried to erase. I think there must have been some black ink on my plate. I'll come back to that. For my sentiment, I grabbed the last piece of the red panel from the Joy cards, and I cut a Simon Says Stamp Mary die-cut shadow from it. I stacked 2 white Mary words, and I glued them on top, and while it was drying, I splattered some gold watercolor onto the snowflake panel. It'll tie into the splatter on the red shadow, but more importantly, it will also camouflage that ink mark in the corner of the panel. Clean design doesn't have to be simple. Maybe clean and complex, clean and detailed, clean and messy. I don't know what to call it, but I think it's my favorite because it's the best of both worlds. And now it's time to head to Therese's video for even more inspiration. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.